My name's Jane Simpson and I'm a careers advisor at a university. I think the key thing is research. You've got to research the company before you go. For various reasons, you might be asked about what you know about the company, why the company appeals to you, and also it's going to make you feel more confident that you've done your research. You've got to understand the job inside out, so that you can go into that interview using your knowledge of the job to anticipate questions. Yeah. So when you go for the interview, read the job description, read the person spec, and try and imagine from that information what they're going to ask you about, because most interviews are structured to show that you meet the person spec, so you can use that. Also, I think try and go into the interview knowing what points you want to get over about yourself. And that doesn't mean rehearsing your answers. It just means knowing, why am I a good candidate for this job? It could be 5 or 6 key things that you really want to make sure you talk about in the interview, so that you're not struggling when they ask you questions thinking, oh, why do I want the job? You should do all that beforehand. And the other thing is plan your trip. There's nothing worse on the day of your interview actually not quite knowing where you're going. Especially if you're going to a small company that might be on an industrial estate on the outskirts of town where you've never been before. And if you've been to an industrial estate, you'll know that they're a bit like a labyrinth sometimes. So, I'd do a trial run if you can. That's not always practical if it's in another city, but, sort out where you're going, have a look on whether it's your sat-nav or, plan your trip on AA, that kind of thing. So know what you're doing, yeah. I think if you do plenty of preparation, then you should feel less nervous if you've thought about why you're a good candidate. You've thought about how you want to market yourself and how you want to come across. But, I don't think you can ever completely get over nerves. But I think the preparation is the key thing, knowing where you're going, make sure your outfit's ready on the day, you've thought about the questions, you know the company, and, I don't think there's anything wrong with admitting you're a bit nervous at the start of the interview, because that can kind of break the ice sometimes, rather than thinking I've got to pretend I'm not nervous. You're a human being, and I think most employers will have been in your position. So I think if you say, actually I'm a bit nervous, and it might be that you say, when I'm nervous I speak too quickly, so please ask me to repeat something if I don't know, if you don't know what I'm talking about. And the other thing is to take your time. If you're nervous and they ask you a question and you think, oh, that's a hard question, then maybe ask them to repeat it or clarify the question if you're not sure, because there's nothing worse than going off at the wrong tangent and then halfway through the question going, I'm not quite sure if that's right. Yeah. So take your time, clarify, ask questions if you need to. Yeah. I think the general rule I would say is you've got to dress in a smart, professional way, whatever job you're going for. So you've got to think about, you're not dressing as if you're going to a nightclub, you're dressing to go for an interview. And I think a good rule sometimes is that if you thought about dressing up as if you were going to meet a client for the first time, for example. So you might know that you're going to work in an industry where you're in a design studio, where it's casual, or you're in an agency where you might dress casually during the day. But if you're going to meet a client, you would probably dress differently. So it's smart, but comfortable. You don't want to go along feeling very uncomfortable, but you want to go along looking like you've made an effort. And I think employers really appreciate people who make an effort at an interview. To be honest, it's nice to go and buy something new. It doesn't have to be expensive, does it? You can buy some nice clothes. And I think also when you dress up for an interview, it actually makes you feel different than wearing your normal clothes. So I think there's that thing as well, you walk in to that interview as a young professional. And there was a great piece of advice given to a student who went on placement a few years ago now, actually with a design company, and that was a second-year student. And it wasn't so much about dressing for an interview, it was about, from now on, forget about being a student, think about yourself as a young professional, and that covers everything, how you behave and how you dress. Okay, I think safe questions are always about things like training and development. Most people, when they go into the first job, are going to need some training. So it could be that you ask about that. You could ask about how your progress will be monitored. You could ask about how quickly you're going to get responsibility, that type of thing. You could ask about what a typical day, what a typical day is like in the office. You could ask about things like maybe specific challenges facing that organisation. But I think just have 2 or 3 things prepared, and if you're worried about forgetting your questions, just make a little note in a small notepad, so that when you come to the end of the interview, you can say, well, actually, I jotted some questions down. And then you might say when you've answered one of those questions, but I'd like to ask about this and this.